So this is my first trip to Poland. I was excited to come here. The Polish fans of role-playing games are amongst the strongest in the world, and I've enjoyed interacting over the years via Twitter or Facebook, and I don't think there's a much more passionate crowd for role players. And I think in this audience, as I look out, I presume there's a lot of developers here and certainly players of the game that we have a lot in common. It's either that we want to play games and we want to make choices for what we want to play, and we traditionally want to play role-playing games. And I find that the more bleak and depressing the game, the better. And in fact, I find with a lot of the audience here that if the game isn't bleak and depressed, you get bleak and depressed. And so I've always had a penchant for post-apocalyptic and keeping it as dark as possible. So if we're developers, I think that one of the things that I think we'll all agree on is that we want to develop our own vision and have an opportunity to do so. We want to make money if our product makes money, and we want to develop a game and a method that works for us. And just like the film business, each director has his own way of putting things together, and the same thing is with us. I have my own sort of unique style that is different than probably what yours is. And the other is that we want to be treated with respect. And that's to me, I think those are very important parts of being a developer in this day and age. I'm seeing some incredible talent come out of Eastern Europe, and specifically Poland. Certainly the Witcher series and the new Witcher 3 is fantastic. Those guys are doing great work. And I'm seeing smaller projects like This War of Mine coming from a Polish developer. Really great stuff. And what I love about it is that they came at it from a way that's like not a game I could have made. It was their own unique vision for what it was. They really did a fantastic job. Or there's a new game called Kingdom Come that I saw on Kickstarter, which actually looks quite nice too. And so when I'm often asked about who my competitor is, I always used to say it's probably two guys or two girls somewhere in the world I've never heard of before, more than my traditional sort of big companies that we compete against. But I think you're really going to start seeing the talent on a worldwide basis start to flex their muscle, and I expect to see more and more coming out of this part of the world. I've always long believed that. So okay, good, this is working properly. So why do I put up this slide, 1981? That's how long I've been making games for. And people love to tell me they weren't even born in 1981, or their parents weren't born in 1981. They love to remind me of how old I am constantly. But that's how long I've been at it. And people ask me why I still do this. Am I crazy? You know, what is it that keeps me going? And I really love this business. I love the strange and brilliant people that I get to work with. And you know, I think about just sort of like how fortunate I am to be in an industry where I can say that the people I work with every day, they're smart, they're ethical, they work on principle, they do not like to work for stupid people, I tell you, and they have a wonderful sense of fairness. And there's not a lot of industries that you can look at and say that about it. And so for that, it's very much what drives me and what I love about this business is ultimately the people I get to work with every day, and certainly it's the fans that play our product. My first company that I ever started was called Saber Software, and that was inspired as a kid, I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. I don't think sword software quite rolled off the tongue, and so I ended up with the name Saber Software. My big influences back at the time, like I said, a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. So when most of my friends were going to the beach or going to Las Vegas, I was behind a Dungeon Master shield rolling a D20, trying to see if my friend survived a stone giant. I read a lot of, there's this old technology called books. Well, I read a lot of books when I was young, hundreds and hundreds of them. I put up Elric of Melniboné up as one of my favorite series. I was always surprised that never got turned into a video game. Heavy Metal magazine, I used to get every single issue, loving it for the art and the style. And of course, The Road Warrior, one of my favorite films of all time. I was an absolute fanboy. In fact, that's one of my favorite scenes of any movie from all time is this one from The Road Warrior. And it very much inspired everything about what I did in the business, especially as it related to Wasteland and then to Fallout after that. this led me up to doing my first game when I was 19 years old called The Demon's Forge. I had to teach myself how to program. There wasn't a lot of materials back then. There were no bookstores. There was no internet. It was primarily magazines. We really had to search for any kind of information on how to do it. And, oops, hit the wrong button, go back. Kind of a funny story behind this. So I was just a kid. I had no budget to speak of. And so this particular cover art for the game, there's no girl on a pole. There's no guy on a snake. There's no guy flying. None of this existed. It was that I had to find a piece of art that was slightly medieval. It was the best I could do. So I got good of a grief at the time that I had a scene from the box that had nothing to do with the game. But hey, when you're 19 years old and you got $300 to spend, you do what you can. And so this was the first game that I really ever did, and it taught me the kind of going through the process of integrating all the elements of just what did it mean to finish a game, to get everything in, to debug it. In this particular case, I had to duplicate the discs by hand, but this was a critical lesson for me to go through, was just the arc of actually finishing something, and it's something I tell young developers all the time, because there's one thing that's true: it's a lot more fun to start a game than it is to finish it. There's nothing enjoyable about that last part. It's a lot of work, and so everybody gets very excited. You know, my son and his friends, they recently said that they're all going to make a game. They're all excited about it. There's 5 of them. They got together, set up all the corporation stuff, and they were going to bang this game off in a month. Well, flash forward, nobody ends up doing anything, and my son ends up finishing the whole thing, and it takes him 6 months. And so that was a great lesson for him. It was like the game itself meant nothing. It was for him to realize what it would take and who would come through and who wouldn't come through and all the problems and submitting it to Apple and the rejections and everything about it. And so especially if you look out later, and I'll talk about crowdfunding, but you have to go through that arc, otherwise you'll really have no idea what you're stepping into. And so the other thing that I learned is that early on was to work with people that were far more talented than I was, to find people who were very good at their individual disciplines, whether it was art or music and sound or in writing. Like I can write for communication, but a writer really knows his craft. And so to work with people that have that individual talent. You know, my skills were fairly technically limited at the time, and so this got me to the other part of my sort of things I learned when I was young, was that there was one particular routine. Like I wrote the whole program, but there was one part that had to be written in 6502. It was a very technical thing that it was above my pay grade. I couldn't do it, and I knew one guy that could. And I chased him, and I chased him, and I badgered the hell out of him for 6 months until he finally wrote that thing for me, and he finally did it. And without it, I couldn't have shipped a game. And so what that was that, you know, your ability to be persuasive and persistent is a really big part of it. If I had not stayed on top of him month after month, I would have never got it. And it's something that I'm always having to do today, is just to keep pushing and pushing. The other part of this, kind of an enjoyable story that I like, so I launched the game, and I only had enough in my budget for one single advertisement. And so I took the ad out, and then I would call stores around the country from one line and go, hey, have you seen this new game? It's called The Demon's Forge. They said, no. I said, oh, I saw an ad for it in a magazine. It looked pretty good. And so they'd go get the magazine. They'd look at it. They said, that does look pretty good. I said, yeah, I'd love to get a copy. They said, let me see if I can get one. And then I'd hang up, and they would call my business line, and I'd pick up. I'd say, Sabre Software, and then I would take the order. So that was my homespun marketing and how I got going. So it was sort of after that, I joined another company for a short while, and then I started another company in October of 1983 when computers had 48K of memory and our disks held 148K of space, and I started Up Interplay. And I was just 20 years old when I started that company. And we started off very small. It was, when you start a company, sometimes there's what you have to do that you have to do before you get to do what you want to do. And so we did educational software, we did military work, we converted other people's products, we did all sorts of things in order to work up to the point where we could do our own original stuff. And our first kind of original game that was successful we did for Activision. It was called Mind Shadow, but then it was the Bard's Tale that put us on the map in a major way back in when he shipped that in 1985. And so like I said, we started off very humble beginnings. I used to roommate with one of my programmers. We would all go to lunch together. Our highlights of the month was when a vendor was trying to impress us, and they would take us to a really nice lunch place, and we would always think that was a great deal. I mean, this was a very humble beginning start. So, like I said, it was the Bard's Tale that really kind of put Interplay and myself on the map, and Wizardry was a big influence with us at the time, but it was really kind of bringing that experience onto the Commodore 64, and Bard's Tale was a huge hit. And so from that, I parlayed that into a series of other games. That's when Wasteland came out in '88, ended up doing Battle Chess. I ended up getting rights to Star Trek. We did a series of graphic adventure games, Judgment Rights and 25th Anniversary, and we also helped launch the careers of a few companies you might have heard of. We gave BioWare their first development contract. Blizzard, I knew all those guys. I knew Blizzard since those guys were in high school. In fact, on the original Bard's Tale box in '85, the party that's on the back of the box is the default party for Alan Adham. I think he was 15 years old, who ended up being one of the founders of Blizzard. We also gave Treyarch their first contract, and those guys, of course, ended up doing the Call of Duty series. And we released a ton of games into the '90s that I'm quite proud of. Fallout, of course, was kind of the most well-known, but it was Icewind Dale, it was Sacrifice, Kingpin, MDK, Baldur's Gate, Redneck Rampage. There was a whole bunch of titles that we did in the '90s that I'm very proud of. And we had to do it, we probably had less financial capabilities than most people, but we were scrappy, and we really cared about the game and the experience, and a lot of people speak to quality, but then at the end of the day, they kind of rush it out the door when the guns are to their head. But who are the ones that are really going to sit there and suck it up and not ship a game, even though you have this tremendous amount of pressure? And to speak to Fallout for a second, because I know that it's a big one over here, is that, and a lot of you may know this story, is that we did Wasteland. In fact, we were doing a lot of work for Electronic Arts, Bard's Tale 1, Bard's Tale 2. And Bard's Tale 3 and Wasteland, EA decided to release them within the same week of each other, which was horrible for us, because to have two big role-playing games from us all coming out in the same week, not a great idea. So Wasteland suffered a bit from that, but it had this huge critical success, and it won a lot of awards, and it scratched the nerve of sort of morally ambiguous gameplay and putting people into difficult positions, being more open-ended in nature, that you could travel around in any way you want. You perhaps would suffer the consequences of doing so, but we would allow you to do that. And so in any case, we were producing a series of hits, but we weren't making much money, because most of the games back then were being done by just a couple of people, and I had these big teams of people. And so I tried to redo my deal with Electronic Arts, and they just really weren't going to have anything to do with it. So that's what made Interplay became a publisher when it did. But then I went to them and said, hey, I'd love to do a Wasteland 2. And they said, no, you're basically a competitor now. That's not going to happen. And so I tried for years to make that happen, and I finally gave up and said, okay, let's just do something spiritually in the same line and take what we learned from Wasteland, apply it. And that's how Fallout was born, was being unable to do the sequel to Wasteland that we had always wanted to do. So after all, in the late '90s, things started to go a little south for the company. We grew too fast. We became very distracted by doing too many things, and the budgets for games were absolutely skyrocketing. And as console became more prevalent, we didn't have that kind of one console title that could help you survive through those tough times. So often, if you look back at history, you'll see whether it was Take-Two with Grand Theft Auto or THQ had wrestling. We didn't have that one, or Activision had Tony Hawk, right? There was always that one title that was really pumping you through the hard times. And our biggest hit was Baldur's Gate, which was a huge PC hit, but it wasn't enough to get us through. And so after a very long period of time, I had been out of the product loop and didn't get to work on games much anymore, frankly. I decided that it was time to start anew. And that's when I started up inXile Entertainment in 2002. Now, I would find that it would not be easy to get a business model that worked in a field where there was so much upheaval. So, back in 2002, there were console transitions going on. Digital distribution really didn't start happening to '04 and '05, and then even then it was young. And then, of course, we had iOS come along, and that was a new platform. And then that quickly became free-to-play. And then AAA budget started skyrocketing. So that was creating where there was only very few development dollars or contracts left for outside companies. And then, of course, discoverability became a whole kind of issue into itself. And so I was at inXile for a good decade trying to figure out what is our model. And I had wanted to do sort of these classic role-playing games, but there seemed to be no way to get this thing financed or off the ground. In fact, it was in late 2011, I was in China, and I gave a keynote about role-playing games, basically lamenting that they were kind of dying, kind of the classic style, and that they were more focused on this new free-to-play model, and that's what everybody was talking about. And so I gave a whole speech about it, and I really didn't see how there was going to be a possibility for me to return doing what it is that I'm doing now. So this was late October. So then in March 2012, like 3 or 4 months later, Tim Schafer launches Double Fine with Broken Age on Kickstarter. And I thought, oh my God, this is my chance. This is, as we say in America, they make our Hail Mary pass, one last chance to make role-playing games. Because I knew that if I were to go out on Kickstarter and pitch Wasteland 2 and it would fail, that was it forever. There was no way any third-party publisher or any kind of money investor would look at it and say, yeah, they would say, I told you there was no market for this. It's not a good idea. So it was very nerve-wracking, but we scraped together a campaign very quickly because I knew that going first was very important, and we launched, Wasteland 2, and it was a success. We had over 60,000 backers give us nearly $3 million to finally make the game that I basically had been waiting 20 years to put together. And so if there's any backers here, thank you. I much appreciate it. I see some there. Great, guys. You guys made a big difference to us. So I like to talk about the power of crowdfunding, obviously, since it's had such a huge impact on me and my company. And you think about crowdfunding, it's pretty amazing that it's an honor system. You're saying, we're going to give you the money up front, and we trust you to go make it. And it's the antithesis of typical development in the industry with any kind of contractual publisher-type relationship, which is you have a whole contract that basically is not built upon trust and all the horrible things that could go wrong and making sure you have protections against that. And so it's so different. And with that pressure, of course, is a great personal pressure because people are keeping an eye on you and making sure that you deliver. And for me, I really wouldn't have it any other way. It so beats the traditional way. And I like to share stories. I have so many war stories over the years, and I give publishers a hard time. In reality, I have friends at some of these publishers, but we used to run into crazy stuff. And I'll give you kind of one story of just the insanity of things that I used to deal with. I was in a negotiation with a huge company, conglomerate. They wanted to do a Bard's Tale sequel. And so they had just a whole host of the most ridiculous things in the contract you'd ever seen. And I said, let's just get it in the room. I'll make all those go away, and we'll get to the more important points. So one of the points they had, for example, was if I sold my company, I owed them $7 million, just period. No matter what I sold it for, I had to cut them a check for $7 million because they said, by virtue of fact of me doing business with them was worth $7 million. And so and I couldn't get them off the point, and they would say, well, we'll put a pin in it, which is a maybe, or we'll come back to it later. They wouldn't just agree. And then the next clause was that I wasn't allowed to say I made the game, ever. So I actually, for the rest of my life, I was prohibited from saying that I made the game, even though it was a sequel to Bard's Tale. And so I finally got to the point where I said, we were in the table, all these lawyers, I said, I really don't like the font in the contract. And they said, what do you mean? I said, I think the font is too small. I really want a bigger font. And they looked at me and they said, okay. I said, good. I just wanted to hear what a yes sounded like. That's all, And so they'd laugh. 2 hours later, I kid you not, the lawyer on the other side goes, I still don't know what the problem with the font is. So this is the world that you rescued us from, that we don't have to have these kind of discussions anymore. And so it was you felt like you were on a reality show half the time. So I know that also along with crowdfunding is there sort of a controversial aspect to it, but so much good comes from it. And you think about what's the alternative? That only the big publishers make all of the money and the rest of us are just sort of doing work for them and we hope to recoup. So I know sometimes I've read in the media where some of the writers are restricted from specifically covering games that are basically in Kickstarter. And it frustrates me that it's not the big companies that need the help, and it's like and the big film companies releasing films during the summer, they're not the ones that need the help. It's always the smaller indies. So I like to see support, because you look at our industry, the top 25 publicly traded companies, they account for about 65% of the global market. So that's not counting the big companies. That's not counting a Bethesda or a Rovio or any other the big private companies, much less the companies outside the top 25. So that leaves all of us in the room mostly competing for maybe 10% of the market or even 5% of the market. And that's where I sort of get to competing is so 20th century for us, is that we as a group, we need to lift each other up and we need to help each other as we don't want to be pounding on each other for that 5 or 10%, but we need to take market share from elsewhere. And so this is why I work very closely now with my so-called competitors, whether it's Obsidian or Larian or a bunch of the smaller ones. You'll see us promoting their game and our Kickstarter updates. It seems counterintuitive for us to be promoting someone that's a spot-on competitor, but I don't really see it that way. I see it as we're no longer in the dark working against each other, but we're in the light sharing information, and that it's a function of 1 + 1 = 3. And we've gotten a great value, all of us, from working together in timing and coordination, promotion, shout-outs, I say, through social channels and things of that nature. In fact, I started up an initiative called Kicking It Forward, which basically speaks to, I was so enamored with Kickstarter and the fact that it was the best way to finance a game, that we've committed to taking 10% of our profits or 5% of our profits and sharing that with other crowdfunding campaigns on a go-forward basis. And we put up a website, and of course that in itself was an honor system, and I think we have 1,000 projects or so that have successfully funded, that have all said that they're going to do the same thing to help kind of share the wealth and pay it forward, so to speak, and help other people out. The next thing kind of to the power of crowdfunding is that we are returning some power to the developer, and it comes in two forms. One is that we get to control our own intellectual property. I've always said that a person is likely to have more integrity over the control of their property than a corporation is. A corporation is just a soulless beast that needs to make money, whereas a person is going to treat it much differently. Walt Disney, when one of the first things he ever did, he did a franchise called Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and he lost the rights to Oswald, and he was so upset about it that's why he invented Mickey Mouse. And so we've seen what he's done with Mickey Mouse. So he was taking an intellectual property that he was able to control. And the other part of it is that we have the ability to actually make money now from our games. And I'll give you this kind of quick slide, which it's kind of a simplistic illustration, which is that, let's say you're on a typical published model and you get a $5 million advance. And let's say from that they generate $7 million of sales. Well, if you were to get a 30% royalty, which is actually quite high in the business, you would have earned $2.1 million against 7. You're still unrecouped $2.9 million. So out of that whole pie, you're not going to make a dime. If you take that exact same product, same budget, and then you self-published it, you'd have sales of $7 million and profit of $2 billion. So that, and what does a developer normally do with that $2 million? They pay their taxes, they probably have enough for 3 or 4 payrolls, and they invest it back into the product. I mean, that is generally what happens. And so this is a model that is now has not really had a chance in the past to exist. The other part of it that I like to talk about is in terms of Kickstarter, because a lot of people ask, why Kickstarter, or why go to Kickstarter again, or again, they question the whole part of it. But I guess I have a broader take on when a fan or the audience wants to get in on a product. So the first one is Kickstarter. That's the earliest part, right? Which is you get the best pricing there. You get a lot of physical goods, collector's editions, things that you're not going to get elsewhere. And you could get your name in or your wife's name in or whatever you want to do. There's some very special things there that you can only get during that part of it. But guess what? Not for everybody. No big deal. There's also early access. That's for another group of people. And that's for people that are impatient. That would be me. Or it would be people that want to get in on the process. And that served a great function for us for making Wasteland 2 better. But then you say, well, there's a group of people, they don't want to do that. Then they just get on launch day. That's where all the excitement is. Everybody's playing. Everybody's sharing comments. It's exciting to be there playing while everybody else does. And so that's your third option to get on the game. The fourth one is, I'll wait till it comes out on sale. And so there's plenty of people that aren't going to buy a game at full price, and they're going to wait for it. You have a fifth option. Wait till it comes out in a bundle. And then, of course, there's a horrible sixth option, which is you'll never buy it. But I don't want to consider that one. That one's too horrible. So these 5 stages of buying, I just look at it. You get in anywhere along that continuum. It's up to you. And so I just think there's something to offer for each one of those down the line. The other part of it is that effectively, through crowdfunding, the fans have become our publisher, but it's a healthier dialogue. And I've described it as when the crowd funds us, the money is pure. And what I mean by that is that our interests are 100% in line. They just want a great game. That's all they care about. They don't care about they care when it ships, but they don't care what quarter it ships, or they don't have some other agenda about R&D write-off or maybe losing interest in a sector and moving on. There's all these different dynamics that can come in place when you're being financed in the typical ways, whereas when the fans are, it's very simple. They just want a good game. And you can have a healthy debate and dialogue about the product, but at the end of the day, they're not holding your money over your head in order to get what they want. It becomes a more healthy discussion. So, we like the dynamic that's come with it. And again, we've had a wonderfully positive experience from Wasteland 2. The other part of it is that you're going to get a lot of games that just simply would not have existed otherwise. Obviously they're the ones that we're doing here, but whether it's Pillars of Eternity or Shadowrun Returns or Elite Dangerous, a number of them, there's a whole kind of mid-tier development that's happening right now that we didn't have this chance before there was crowdfunding. So the next part is share some of my crowdfunding tips in case some of you are considering it for yourselves here. I admit that I have a long history in the business, having done it for 30 years, so people know my work, and so I have some different advantages that someone might have being their first one, but that doesn't mean not to do it and not to get in there and try to make something happen. I think the first thing I would say is treat it like you're launching a new business. I see that sometimes people will sort of just kind of throw it out there and sort of hope that the video that they presented will do the trick, and there's a whole thing that goes on behind it, and you need to treat it and not just sort of, again, throw it out at the last second. And to go to people, outside people, to your friends, and get their really blunt advice about what that you're doing. But you've got to position it carefully. You can't say, "Hey, I'm launching tomorrow. Take a look," right? Because they're going to know nothing can be had. And I've had a lot of times that's happened to me where people said, "Hey, Brian, would you mind taking a look at our video or giving some input? We're going out tomorrow." And I said, "Well, there's really no point." If that's what it is, to make sure you give yourself that time. And don't worry, even if your mind, you've set a date and you need to delay it, you only get one chance to make this thing work. You got that one opening weekend, so to speak, so I wouldn't be so focused on that date. You've got to have the proper things in place before you do it. The other part I say is really to kind of sell the dream. And what I mean by that is that, you think about what excites you more. Is it a movie trailer that's perfectly put together with all the right scenes and the music, or is it just watching the first 5 minutes of a film? It's usually the trailer most times that gets you more excited. And so I find, and a lot of this stuff, and by the way, whatever I say, there's a case that goes against what I'm talking about, but this is kind of the way I look at stuff, is that the the video of gameplay that drones on for 5 or 6 minutes with bullet point after bullet point after bullet point, I don't think is going to be a particularly compelling sort of pitch for people. And also, if you go into way too much detail, in some ways, you pigeonhole your stuff, yourself in. You want to leave yourself some latitude during development. I've seen some development Kickstarters where they promised all these features, then when they got to the end, they actually didn't make sense for those to be in for really obvious reasons, but they did promise it. So they either didn't deliver the features, in which case they take a fair amount of criticism, or they pigeonhole it in at the end and it didn't really belong there. So you want to leave yourself some latitude anyway. And what's sort of, the one thing we have this big internal debate, and I'm not quite sure the answer to this, is how much showing a lot of running code has as an advantage. On one hand, you want to prove that you know what you're doing, but on the other hand, I find just watching code running for minutes on end doesn't seem to be as compelling. I can go onto Steam and watch code running. So I think there's a fine line there, but I think that to generate that excitement is selling the dream of what you're going to do. The other thing is, fundamentally, they need to love the concept, trust you can deliver, and like you. And that's why I tell people, put yourself in the video. Again, so if it's just a video of game footage, I can go onto Steam and I can watch hundreds of videos with game footage. You're not really offering anything. And I can speak from my own experience, and I don't think I'm the only one. I've financed so many Kickstarter games that I probably wouldn't have bought otherwise. If I had just seen it in the Steam store or the GOG store, I wouldn't have bought it. But because I loved their passion for it, or their take, or their dream for what it was going to be, I ended up backing those things, and so it's a big part of it. So, and I've seen some Kickstarter projects go on and talk about how they're going to, give the money to charity or do all these different number of things, and I don't see that really pushes the needle for them. They've got to love the concept for what you're doing. Again, trust that you can deliver, and hopefully like you at the same time. The other thing is, I say, don't crowdfund the first game you've ever made, which is sort of like what I was saying about my son earlier. Just go through the arc of creating a game, even if it's small, even if it's a small iOS product where you go through Apple, you get out the bugs, and you submit it, you go through it. I see a lot of people that want to launch their very first product they've ever made before on crowdfunding, and that's super dangerous because if you've never been through the arc, you really don't know exactly what you're getting into. And because it's of such a personal nature, you don't want to fail on Kickstarter because people are rightfully upset if their money goes sideways. And so I really highly encourage you to just finish a product, even if it doesn't get published, to just go through that arc of a process. The other one is tapping into an existing market, which is actually kind of twofold, which is a sort of, I should say, an existing fan base or a market that is underserved. And so some examples of that is that, had my first pitch been, I'm going to do this Angry Birds derivative instead of Wasteland 2, I guarantee you I would have failed. That was hardly an underserved marketplace. And so I knew that, obviously I wanted to make Wasteland 2, but I also wanted to make a PC-centric post-apocalyptic role-playing game. And so as Fallout moved on to become a little more console-centric, I knew there was an opportunity that people wanted that, because I would hear about it all the time, and I also wanted to make it. Pillars of Eternity had the same thing. They knew that people wanted a Baldur's Gate 3 type experience, and that's what they delivered on. And so there's a focus, and I could go back further. If I think about my time when I was doing business with Blizzard, with the original Warcraft, there was an old game called Dune, which was one of the first real well-done RTSs. And so everybody loved it, and they weren't really following up with a Dune sequel, so they saw that opportunity. They knew it was a market that wasn't being served, and they did a medieval version of Warcraft. Off they went. And by the way, Diablo was the same thing as they looked at hack. So they're very focused on those markets. Kickstarter is no different than that. The other part of it is whether you can tap into an existing fan base. I think Witcher is a great example of that, which is the series of novels. There was already a fan base that liked the material that they could go upon. And I don't know, are you guys familiar with Exploding Kittens? Have anybody with that one? So that's a perfect example where Exploding Kittens, those guys, they lined up with a comic strip, digital comic strip called The Oatmeal. It's very funny. And he had a following on Facebook followers. I want to say 5 million followers or whatever. But they took his fan base, they put it together with a card game. And they asked for $10,000 on Kickstarter, and they ended up with 8.7 million. And they did that because they tapped into a fan base that was already there. So as you're thinking about this, if you can do those two things, your chance of success goes up much greater. You can do it your own route and do something that doesn't fall into that. I'm not saying don't do it, but it's probably going to take just a lot longer to get there because you're going to have to develop your own following based upon what you do. And the last part here is just that launching your campaign, I say, is step 40. So, you know, my first Kickstarter we did very quickly. I saw Tim Schafer's and we launched 30 days later. It went out fast. Torment, we spent 4 months planning. The new one, Bard's Tale 4, we're doing a campaign next month. We've taken 6 months setting that up for the planning. So it's building awareness, getting all the assets. You know, you got to release at launch day and throughout the campaign. We engage our fans way early on. Not just telling them about it, but soliciting their input. Like, for example, we just put up all the rewards and tiers a couple days ago. Said, hey, here they are. Give us input. What do you guys think? And so there's that part of it, and it's also to get get the press. In my case, I have a PR group here for Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and for North America, all starting just to try to get the word out in any way that we can. I have all my fellow developers, all the ones that have asked me for favors over the years. I get my favor back now, get a little promotion, and also get your relatives to back you. You've got to have that day one success. It is absolutely critical that you come out of the gate, just like a box office movie, because what happens is if you launch and there's just nothing happening, even people, I believe, that are genuinely interested, they get there and the ticker's not moving, they think other people must know something I don't. And so, and the opposite is true, of course, is that if there's momentum, there has a tendency to believe that something good is happening there. So you really got to make sure that you come out of the gate strong. The next one is to talk a little bit about my studio philosophy. So what are the things that I talk about, my tenets for running a company, or how I look at the marketplace? And the first one I say is that it's chaos. And so we're in a very complex industry. We're inventing, we're innovating, and the fact that you think you can make things run super smooth is a completely false goal. And now people who run spreadsheets in production drives them crazy to hear that, but it's absolutely true. And there's a great book, and I talk about it a little bit, called Creativity, Inc., by the president of Pixar. And he speaks to these very points, and he does a great job of articulating many things that I've sort of done in the past. And, you know, oftentimes in a company, you'll have people in there, in your company, that this is messed up, I didn't hear about that, I didn't know about that meeting, blah, blah. It goes on and on and on, infinite. And I always tell them, this is as good as it gets, right? There are people sitting at Apple and people sitting in Google saying this place is messed up, they don't know what they're doing, but they're making a tremendous amount of money, so they let it go away. So that's not to say you shouldn't be planning and organizing as best you can. Don't get me wrong, but the fact of the matter is it's always going to be chaotic. Just kind of deal with it, get used to it, and if you get your mindset about it, that there's going to be a certain amount of chaos, then you get less people focused less on complaining about it and just sort of working with the system. The other thing that I am a big believer in is that iteration trumps perfect planning. And again, so I mentioned the book a moment ago. So the president of Pixar says, early on, all of our movies suck. And so this is Pixar saying this. And it's certainly the same with games, which is early on, they all suck. And if I give you 9 months to make a game, and you had the ability to have 6 months of pre-production and 3 months of iteration, or you inverted it and had 3 months of production and 6 months of iteration, I guarantee you the latter will deliver you a better product. The more iteration time you get, the better. So don't be so hung up on pre-production. You need to there's a lot that needs to be done, so again, don't get me wrong, but you want to get to the iteration phase as quickly as possible. In fact, one of the things in the book that I love, a quote, if you think about, he says, the cost of preventing errors can be more expensive than fixing them. It's a pretty profound statement when you think about production, that you're spending all this energy trying to prevent errors. It's going to actually cost you more than if you just jumped into it and made it happen. And it's also the iteration stage, it's where the soul of your game comes from. It's where it's sterile up until then, until we get it in. You know, and like my saying has always been that you're not even making a game until you're playing the game, ultimately. And so the quicker you get to that stage, the better. The next one is about the smallest of details. And so this speaks to that I believe that our audience instinctively senses when creators spend the extra energy layering in all the smallest of details into the product, creates sort of a rich and consistent experience. And these details are often the memories that we share with our players. It could be just the smoothness of an animation, or it could be a particle effect, or it could be that one little extra piece of dialogue that just kind of felt missing. And that all those little details that because we'll sit in meetings, and oftentimes people will say something, "Yeah, we should have done such and such," and people will sit around the room and they'll laugh or go, "That would be funny," or "Great," but then nobody writes it down. I write every one of those things down, because oftentimes when I circle back later, that was the idea, that when people played the game, they remembered that one little thing. So I'm very focused on the detail. The other thing is to look for the moment. So again, I look at entertainment, that all entertainment has its key moments. It's the if you think about movie trailers, they're keenly aware of what their moments are. That's why they carefully pick them all out and put them in the trailer. And so, again, it's that unexpectedness. And if you watch Game of Thrones, they do a wonderful job of that. It seems like every episode I watch, there's a whole hour of interesting stuff. I love the show. But, there's that one moment, the red wedding or whatever it is, where you watched it and you talk about it, and the next day we're all talking about it. Those moments are super critical that you capture those. And so for us, there's a focus on finding those, extracting those, recognizing those, beefing those up. The next one is the collaboration effect, and I say embracing it without fear. And so it's kind of the concept that creativity is not a single endeavor. And so you want to foster a healthy environment for which people are allowed to speak their minds. Now, sounds obvious, but oftentimes you'll have environments where people are very candid in the halls walking around, but you get them in the meeting rooms, nobody wants to say anything. They don't want to offend someone, whatever it is. You have to force those conversations. You have to force to have an environment where everybody feels like they can talk, because especially in the creative sense, it's critical that we're all talking to each other on this. Ultimately, we're judged not on where the ideas came from, but the execution of our ideas. So I'm always reaching out to pull in ideas. It doesn't matter whether it came from the producer, the director, or in some cases even from the audience itself. I treat the crowd just as another door in my office that I can reach out to. In fact, our UI for Wasteland 2 was done by some kid who was 19 years old, he did something that my audience liked better than my own art department, right? So I said, well, they all love it, let's do it. And so that it didn't matter where the idea came from, it's just that you're soliciting the ideas from everywhere internally. And the most important point, of course, is there'll be varying debates about what to do, but once a decision is made, even if it's not your idea, you treat it like it was yours, and you move forward on that, because that's what's been made into the decision. So that collaboration element is super important. The other thing is just making the hard decisions, which is no one likes wishy-washy CEOs or producers. You got to make your decisions. Now, sometimes, and this hits the fear part to some degree, is that there's a sort of an analysis paralysis that comes through. People are so afraid of being chastised for making an error that they overanalyze things. At the end of the day, I find their failure rate's about the same. And so I look at it like, as long as I'm making 7 out of 10 good decisions, I don't want to hear about the other 3. We want to just keep moving forward. So let's talk about role-playing games for a second. One of the most complex products there is. So you take a typical screenplay, runs about 22,000 words. So that's for an hour-and-a-half movie. We take something like The Lord of the Rings. All 3 books added up together, 473,000 words. Wasteland 2 ends up coming in bigger than The Lord of the Rings at 550,000. War and Peace, another major effort. The Holy Bible itself, 788,000. Torment, 800,000, bigger than the Bible. You think about how much content. So a typical RPG, if it has 30 hours of storytelling, that's more storytelling content than all the Star Wars films added up all together. So it's enough to drive you crazy when because you think about, if you had to make 20 films back to back, at the end you'd be like this, as you're trying to think it through. These things become bigger than any one person could ever know every nuance of. The other big part, of course, is choice and consequence. And I find that's the hallmark of a deep role-playing game. And the thing about it is that in order to have true choice or consequence, you have to make the commitment to creating a lot of content that you know most people won't see. Because that, by default, it comes with the territory. If you're going to make the game, and they're going to truly be making their own choices. Because if every choice comes you back to the same place, it's not really interactive, and you're not really providing much choice or consequence. So we have this strong commitment to probably 30% of the game we know the average person is not going to see on a single playthrough. But in fact, we looked at Wasteland 2, we said that it's virtually impossible for two people to have the same experience. The other part is that character matters, and what I mean by that is that everything starts with the characters. What's their motivations? I think we're beyond the point of people wanting to destroy the whole planet because they're a bad guy, which never really made any sense, since they would be destroyed too half the time. And so, but I think more importantly is having the people in the world react as they should, because the more they don't, the more it kind of breaks down in your mind that you're having a nice immersive experience. And again, the more nuanced you can make it, the better. Like we have this one guy named Scotchmo who's in Wasteland 2, and he's a smelly old drunk. And so you pick him up, he's kind of a character. But we really made an effort that throughout the game, that when he walked into a bar, for example, people, if you had Scotchmo in your party, of course, you didn't have to have him, they would say, hey, Scotchmo, and they'd see him and they'd talk about him, or they'd comment on how much he smelled or whatever. And we took that all the way to the end. We had episodes about Scotchmo that happened literally 40 to 50 hours later in gameplay if he was with your party. And to me, that's kind of the nuance and the character development. The other part is shaping your character. This is obviously something that makes a good role-playing game. Starts with character creation and goes through the process of the entire development. We try to do things that give it more personality than just the attributes. Fallout, for example, did a great job of that with the perks and trait system, with the traits having positive and negative. And they had things like Bloody Mess, which would actually affect the end of the game, or Fast Shot, which was you could get off shots, but you couldn't have critical hits. Or, of course, there were the perks that were just positive. Wasteland 2, in fact, we're introducing a version later this year because we wanted to we're calling it quirks and perks that we're putting in it. So we have things like being a manic depressive, or you can be a way of the squeezins, which is basically snake squeezins is what you drink in the game. So you're basically an alcoholic, and so when you're drunk, you get +3 action points, 25% extra damage, and when you're sober, you don't do as well. And it's hard to stay drunk all the time. The other thing is just about the intelligence of the audience, is to never underestimate how smart they are. They will spend more time playing your game than you probably will. They'll find every nuance of it, and this really helps shore up the reason why we put all that unseen content into the game, because at some level, even though they're not experiencing it, they know that it's there, because they'll look back and go, I could have gone these 2 ways, and I went that way. I wonder if I'd gone that way. How did they even handle that? They'll know in their mind that the game is very deep. The audience is very bright. And even when I used to make these games when I was younger, like our audience now is 30, 40, 50 years old, but back then they were teenagers. And we made the games smart, and even our audience when they were teenagers were smart. In fact, games back then were actually harder than they are now. Quite ironically. So never underestimate how smart it is that your audience is with an RPG. And because what you don't want, because you always want to put yourself in the position of the players, what you don't want is people saying, did they play their own game even? You got to just know that your audience is going to notice everything. So speaking of, we're releasing a new Torment trailer today, and so I figured I'd debut it here. And so it's, we're kind of getting close to the point where we're going to start putting it in people's hands, but I figured a quick little demonstration of Torment, and you can see some of the combat systems. So I hope is the audio on the video? We hope, I don't know, we'll see.
It is mysterious.
We have audio, no video.
It is alive. It is wondrous. terrifying, alien and exotic. It is the ninth world. A world unlike any other. Amid the dangers and ancient secrets, what does one life matter? Find your answer.
There we go. Yeah, very good. Okay, looks like we're getting low on time. I'd tell you, if you ever find yourself having to get up and give a speech in front of a bunch of people, you never quite know how long it's going to take, because when you're standing in front of the mirror versus you guys is a whole different deal. So, real quickly, we are launching another Kickstarter campaign. You know, back in the day, the dungeon crawl was the biggest category of RPGs, whether it was Wizardry or Might and Magic or Bard's Tale. And so I personally always loved that category, and I've always wanted to take another stab at it. So I've since got the rights back for the full trademark and copyright. So we're going to be basically bringing back the classic dungeon crawl, or reviving it in a bigger way. In fact, the original Bard's Tale happened in Skara Brae. That was the city it was located in. So last month I went to Scotland to the actual Skara Brae. It's a village, a Neolithic village, not really a city, but I went there to film my Kickstarter video, which, by the way, sounded good on paper. I didn't realize it was -4 degrees Celsius, and so I was actually standing out there in my mouth with the wind hitting my face, and my mouth was freezing up. I couldn't say the letter M. I kept saying mimic like that, and I had to change the word from mimic to copy because I couldn't get the words out. It was so painful. Anyway, we'll see how it reads in the video. But anyway, I'm pretty excited about that. So anyway, I hope I've given you guys some kind of insight today, and here's to reviving the dungeon crawl. So anyway, thanks for having me.
We still have like 5 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
Brent, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for such an inspiring lecture. We still have like 5 minutes for questions, so please raise your hand if you have any questions. Yes.
Hi. Considering what you've done and what you have shaped and told us about the history of you working on games, do you think you see yourself right now past the point where you would probably, I mean, just supposedly, never get back to the publishing model and working on games in that way? I mean, even if that would be like simultaneous, some of them you Kickstarter or crowdfund and some of them you publish with other publishers, do you think these days are gone for you?
Do you mean me being a publisher or working with a publisher?
No. I'm saying, like, do you don't see yourself anytime in the future creating your games, developing them, and then getting them out with a big publisher, something like the old, like you've done in the old days?
I don't know. I'm kind of spoiled right now, and I'm enjoying it. Listen, you can never say never in this business. Maybe crowdfunding goes away as a concept, right? Any number of things could happen. Or perhaps, you know, we're working on a product and a publisher wants to take it out onto a platform like console, and I'm not really doing console. You could say I'm working with a publisher, but that's a little bit different than a publisher who's literally going to approve every milestone and pay us and sort of creatively dictate what we're going to do. So I don't think I could see us in a straight up publishing arrangement like the past. I mean, I think there are hybrid opportunities. I mean, Obsidian worked with a publisher with Pillars, but it was really their thing. So I'm not quite sure whether that falls into it. And even with us, with Deep Silver, you know, we don't do console, physical, retail. So we'll let them put it out on the retail shelves because I'm not about to manufacture and open up accounts and that sort of thing. But yet, we're the ones that we're handling the product. So there could be hybrids, but I don't see it us going back to the straight up way. Like I said, I'm kind of spoiled now. Speaking of Obsidian.
Hey, Brian. Now that you've gone through a successful Kickstarter and are working on others, do you have any thoughts on certain backer rewards that might have been really good ideas to begin with, and when you finally had to fulfill those rewards, turned out to be logistical nightmares, and you wouldn't recommend people putting them into their Kickstarters?
You said on the physical rewards?
Yeah, and all the different like backer rewards. Which things turned out to be giant nightmares that you wouldn't recommend?
Well, I think you guys will know every part of the physical rewards is a bit of a nightmare, right? I mean, it's a lot of work you have to do. We were fortunate with us because we did let Deep Silver handle our physical rewards, so they ended up doing all of that for us. But you know, we go back and forth on that. I mean, we're doing some special boxes for Bard's Cell that are handmade, these unbelievable reliquary boxes, and it's going to take as long to make the boxes as it's going to make the game. We will literally have people working on them for 2 years just to get them done. So, you know, you really got to plan it out. So, but we haven't had any big nightmare other than I think the shipping cost is always the big surprise. I mean, the international shipping costs are really high, and I think early on in Kickstarter people they weren't really too focused on that, but we are very much so now.
One last question, yeah?
Hey, so you've told us about the good things in Kickstarter and advantages. What's the biggest problem for you on using a Kickstarter to found your game? What's the dark side of it? Is it anything?
I feel like I should come to you. I can hardly hear you. The biggest what?
The biggest problem, the biggest issue about using a Kickstarter founding.
The biggest issue with using Kickstarter?
Yeah, is there any?
Well, let me think. Well, obviously we've had such a great experience. You know, it's just so different. Again, I've come from my history of working with some publishers. It was so negative that everything feels fantastic, right? So even the problems don't seem too bad in comparison. I think the biggest thing is that you've really made it a spectator sport of sorts, and so you have people questioning your every decision. And so on one hand, you want to take all the input, and you're absolutely going to respond to some of it, but there's other parts where you say, well, no, this is how we're going to do it. And so it could be that, you know, I remember we chose the Unity engine early on when Unity was mostly used for very small projects, and so we had to, you know, sort of defend that. Or I've been on my Facebook, and I was playing Candy Crush once, and it posted up something, and somebody said, hey, Brian, get back to work. You know, we funded you, right? You know, so like they're on it, you know. But you know, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Oh, is that it? Okay.
Last question, yeah.
Hello, Brian. I was wondering, knowing how Sven Winke from Larian Studios always talks about his great RPG game that he's aiming to create, what is your ultimate goal in game development?
What's my ultimate game in game development?
What's your ultimate goal in game development? What are you aiming to create?
Oh, like sort of overall, what is it?
That's right.
Boy, let me think. Well, I think ultimately, I mean, I want a game that goes beyond me, goes beyond my lifetime and my legacy, that's remembered more than anything. I mean, I think we're all, you know, you watch the Torment video, it says, what does one life matter? I think we're all trying to find making our lives matter in some way, and I'm fortunate to be in the entertainment business where I can have some aspect of that. And so, and you know, I'm not quitting anytime soon. I watched the movie, there's an Alfred Hitchcock movie, and Alfred Hitchcock had his biggest hit when he was 60 years old. So I figure I still got some time. I think that'd be great to have my biggest hit when I'm 60. And so, you know, I think there's so much more. I'm so fascinated by everything that's going on in terms of, you know, I've always enjoyed bringing all the elements together. Now there's a lot more elements to bring together, you know, whether it's VR or photogrammetry or all the different things that are happening. I love just bringing those things together. I look at something like Bard's Tale, And I think, boy, there's an Oculus product that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, I'm moving through a dungeon, first person, kind of perfect. So, I love just bringing the elements together.
Thank you very much.